to humans. But this week we're talking about justice to nature. And would you like to give an overview to this week's discussion, inshallah?
Right. Thank you, Haja Mazlina, and also to our listeners who follow our program every week. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we are given this opportunity again to meet on the air in the program Men and Nature. And as mentioned by Hajah Mazlina, our topic this week will be on sustainability. And we're going to look at how we can do justice to nature. Perhaps to start off with, I would like to recap some of the things that we have discussed in the previous weeks during our program Men and Nature. And I think it's best to start off by understanding and remembering that at the center of the Islamic belief is the principle of Tawheed, or the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this concept of Tawheed is central in that it reminds that ourselves as believers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the almighty creator that creates everything that exists in this reality, including the natural world that we live in, the natural world that surrounds us. And Tawheed is the all-encompassing value that is evident in the unity of humanity, unity of man and nature, and the unity of knowledge and values. The inculcation of Tawheed in achieving ecological sustainability is pertinent in that it reminds mankind not to simply abuse, exploit, and destroy the natural world that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. Instead, what we should do is we must respect the natural world with justice, and also ensuring that there is balance in whatever that we do in utilizing nature. And if we remember, in our previous discussions from the earlier weeks, I outlined a number of principles that we should observe when we deal with nature. The first is the principle of khalq, or creation, and this is related to the principle of Tawheed, as it forms the awareness that all resources found in the natural world has its creator, and therefore we have to be mindful when we utilize these creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we have the principle of khilafah, which relates to the role of vicegerent, trustee, and custodian that has been entrusted upon mankind by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ever since the time of the creation of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. And because we are put on this as Khalifa, we must remember that we are actually the representative of a higher authority. And that higher authority is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, we should we should always make sure that we carry out this responsibility in a way that is just to the natural world. And then we have the principle of Nizan, which means that we have to place a great importance on balance when it comes to development, including with regards to the utilization of natural resources, so that it does not upset the balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, especially in the natural world and in the ecosystem. And we also have the principle of shukur, which is being thankful. When inculcated and practiced, it is a way for us to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the many blessings that Allah has given us, including all the necessities and resources in the natural world for us to continue living and being able to sustain our livelihood. So all these principles, Tawheed, Mizan, Khalq, Khilafah, Shukur, they are actually part of the principles that can lead to sustainability, something that we will discuss in greater depth shortly, and something that I think we should always take heed and give attention to.
Inshallah. Now, would you continue on how would you describe the state of the world at the moment with regards to the environment? Yes.
Right. Thank you, Haja Mazlina. I think many of us are actually very much aware that currently environmental degradation is becoming more rampant, and we are also experiencing climate change that actually has impact on our lives. And all these environmental degradation and also climate change is threatening the planet. And because of this, we see and we take note that the call for action has become more intensified in recent years. Environmental and climate scientists have provided a lot of evidence that we are in a dire environmental crisis, and this needs to be addressed. And we can see changes in the environment, both physically and also chemically. In terms of changes in the physical states of the environment as a result of climate change, we can observe, and this has been recorded, that since the 19th century, the temperature of the Earth's surface is steadily increasing. Within the same period of just over 100 years, the sea level has increased by almost 1/4 meter, and it is increasing at a very worrying pace, which is a direct result of melting glaciers and ice caps that flow into the oceans. Equally distressing is the chemical changes taking place in the environment. We see that chemical composition of the air, which is an important marker for climate change, has increased, especially with regards to the composition of carbon dioxide, which has increased from 290 parts per million by volume in the year 1880, to 400 parts per million by volume in 2020, which was last year. So the elevated level of carbon dioxide is a cause for concern, as these are actually important indicators for climate change. Now, it has been argued that aside from actions in the form of political will and also scientific solutions, there is also an increasing need for a systematic theological perspective on ecology and environment, or some people call it eco-theology, as a form of religiously inspired call for action to resolve the environmental crisis that we are facing currently. So I think this is something that we can take note of, and we can draw from the two primary sources of Islam, namely the Quran and the Hadith, some of which we have discussed in previous weeks, where we can see that there is guidance given by Islam in the forms of exhortations, warnings, examples, and principles, all of which can be extracted and translated into meaningful actions. Now, in the context of climate change and environmental degradation, these are actually affirmative actions that we hope can arrest the environmental crisis that we are facing in order to achieve sustainability.
Okay, inshallah. But would you share with us one of the ideas being put forward to look after the environment is by practicing sustainability? But before that, what is actually meant by sustainability?
Okay, I think the term sustainability has been used quite frequent lately, and some of us may be familiar with the term but may not be too aware of its origins. From my reading, I found that the concept of sustainability has to do with the concept of sustainable development that we can actually trace back to a German term which means sustained yield. And this term actually dated back to 1713 and was used in the field of forestry. The crux of this concept is an attempt to strike a balance between resource consumption in the context of the origin of the word, logging, and also reproduction. Now, in the modern context, the word sustainable was first used in 1972 by a group of scientists from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, in looking for a model output that represents a world system that is sustainable without sudden and uncontrolled collapse, and at the same time capable of satisfying the basic material requirements of all people. Now, sustainable development or sustainability can therefore be understood as a pattern of economic growth in which the utilization of resource aims to meet human needs while at the same time ensuring that the environment is preserved in meeting the present needs as well as the needs for the future. So there are actually two important concepts when it comes to sustainability. Now, the first concept is needs, where priority should be given to the world's poor population, and limit, which refers to the ability of the environment to meet today's needs and also the future generations' needs. So in essence, we have this Islamic Declaration on Climate Change, or IDCC, which was endorsed by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and was launched in Istanbul, Turkey on 18th August 2015, and later submitted to the United Nations General Assembly on 18th April of 2016. And this is actually an effort by the Muslim community to put ecological sustainability at the forefront of the Muslim agenda. Aside from IDCC, there is also an ongoing effort called Mizan, which is an Islamic Charter on the Environment being put together by the United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP. And this is also another effort or initiative to put sustainability as an agenda for Muslims. So the spirit behind these two Islamic the eco-theological initiatives, for lack of a better term, IDCC and Mizan, these are embedded within the preservation of the three-dimensional relationship we have discussed so many times before, namely the relationship between mankind and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the relationship between ourselves, and also the relationship between mankind and the environment. So if you look at these initiatives, I think this is an effort to create awareness amongst Muslims. And at the same time, we can highlight that in Islamic teaching, there are examples shown by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there are principles in the Quran which we can adopt and translate into actions in order to ensure sustainability in the natural world.
Okay, thank you. So let's just narrow down on the practices now. What are the practices that can ensure sustainability?
Well, there are many suggestions as to what we can do when it comes to practices to ensure sustainability. One of the practices that have been suggested are green practices. So if you look back at what I mentioned earlier with regards to two key concepts in sustainable development, namely needs and limit, we have to remember that when we try to fulfill our needs, it is so important to give attention to the limitation that exists in the natural world. So without keeping an eye on the limit of production to fulfill the needs, this will eventually lead to wastage. So when wastage occurs, then the whole process of fulfilling needs is not sustainable. So it is with this in mind that green practices are formulated. Green practices can be defined as actions, decisions, policies, and lifestyle that are environmentally friendly and ecologically responsible, which help protect, preserve, and also conserve the environment, as well as sustain its resources for the needs of the current and future generations. In other words, what we're trying to do with green practices is that we're trying to be just to the natural world, while at the same time ensuring our own survival. Now, concepts related to green practices include the 3R hierarchy. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the 3R: reduce, reuse, and also recycle.
Yeah.
In other words, when we talk about the 3R, it's actually an effort to mitigate wastage in order to overcome problems of unsustainable development. We should begin with reducing waste, and this is followed by reusing. If we can't reduce, we reuse, and finally we recycle. So we have to remember this hierarchy. We begin with reducing. We need to try to reduce waste. The problem is, especially in this day and age, and especially more with online purchase, we tend to buy things that we don't actually need.
Yeah.
And when we do this, we end up creating more waste. So that's why we have to have a conscious effort to reduce what we buy. We only buy what we need, so that we can ensure that we reduce any forms of unnecessary waste. Failing which, when there is waste, let's try to reuse the waste in other forms. So this is also an effort. For example, when we have items that are broken, okay, rather than buying a new one, let's try to repair it so that we can use it again. So this is an attempt or an effort that we can try to implement to avoid waste in our lives. Reusing can also be done by selling or donating items that are no longer needed. Rather than throwing them away, why not donate or resell them? You know, we have things like pre-loved items or clothings.
Yeah.
So this is a concept that we can instill within ourselves. And at the top of the pyramid is recycle, and this is done only after efforts to reduce waste and reuse materials have been exhausted. Recycling would enable materials that would otherwise be thrown away to be used again by making them into new products. Now, the 3R hierarchy is the classic green practices that have often been put forward. But in 2013, environmentalist Bia Johnson actually expanded upon the 3R hierarchy into the 5R hierarchy by adding two more layers, namely refuse and repurpose. The hierarchy again starts with from the perspective of Bia Johnson. The hierarchy begins with refuse. Refuse is located at the very base of the hierarchy, and this is considered to be the most fundamental of actions that consumers can take. We can refuse to buy things that we don't need, as well as things given for free. Sometimes when we walk around, people tend to give us handouts in the forms of brochures, pamphlets,
Yeah.
and we can actually refuse this because this can actually help to reduce any forms of waste. And then there is also reduce, which is the next step. We can reduce waste as has been discussed. And when we cannot refuse, when we cannot reduce, and when we cannot reuse, the next step in the 5R hierarchy is repurpose. What this means is that we are actually taking an innovative way of taking items meant for one purpose and use them for other purposes. For example, if you buy jam in a jar, once we have used all the jam for consumption, we can repurpose the jar for other uses. For example, we can use the jar to keep loose change. So this is one way of repurposing materials that we have.
Right.
And finally, it's recycling. So these are some ideas that we can actually think of in efforts to reduce waste, and this is in line with green practices, and these are actually actions that can actually help sustainability.
Yes.
We can practice these as a way to ensure sustainability is part of our lifestyle, and this is also a way for us to do justice to the natural world.
Yes, but at this point of time, the share, if we see that, especially during this time of movement control order, where online buying is,
Yeah.
really, a lot of people resort to online buying because there's no other choice of going to the shops. It's not, movement control. How do we help on reducing or recycling? How do you suggest that we should do this? Because when we buy online, we cannot, let's say, bring back all these containers, for example, or go out to the recycle center. What do you suggest?
Okay, there are a few things that I think we can do. One, definitely, I agree with you that in the current situation with the movement control order that we are currently going through, buying online has almost become a necessity that we cannot avoid. And in fact, that is the best, rather than going out and risking ourselves buying things at shops. So when we do this, I think we have to observe a few things. Number one, I think we have to be disciplined when we buy things.
Okay.
Do not easily be influenced by the things advertised on social media, for example. The thing about social media is that the social media has a way to identify our buying trends, and we can find advertisements based on these trends that we have within ourselves. Advertisements will then crop up and suggest things for us that in actual fact we may not actually need. But because of these advertisements can be very alluring, we can be easily influenced, and we can simply click on the button to buy the things that we don't actually need. So I think discipline is very important. We have to decide what we really need and what are things that we don't actually need.
Right.
So this can help to reduce wastage. And then when it comes to things like recycling and stuff, well, we can keep them away for a while. and wait until things are better for us to recycle, go to recycling centers and whatnot. I think at the end of the day, it goes back to our own habits and our own discipline. Even when it comes to going out shopping physically, it still requires a certain amount of discipline. Most of the times, if you go out without a list, we end up buying things that we don't actually need, because when we see the stuff on the shelves, it's like as if they're calling us, buy me, buy me.
Right.
So I think this self-discipline is very important.
Right.
And we have also to take note, if we realize that what we buy, if it can lead to wastage, then it can impact on the environment. Then I think if we have that realization and awareness, that can actually help us in instilling green practices within our actions.
What do you think about recycling centers should also continue to operate during this MCO, so people can actually send all this, we can reuse and recycle?
Well, this is a difficult question to answer. Should we categorize recycling centers as something that is essential or an essential service? I think perhaps at this point, with a high number of cases, recycling centers may not be able to operate as they were. But I think we can always have things like recycling boxes,
Right.
where we can put things without having to interact with anyone.
True.
So I think these are readily available, and we can use this to to practice recycling.
Right, thank you. As we said every time, actually, Dr. Sheikh, that actions like this needs to be frequently shared. The awareness, to be educated. And what are the initiatives taken by Muslim scholars inculcating sustainability?
Right, as I mentioned earlier, we have this declaration called IDCC. And when I look at the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change, it's interesting that they have actually listed down a number of things that the Prophet Muhammad SAW did that we should actually emulate and try to practice in our contemporary lives. For example, we have actions that are on a large scale. When Prophet Muhammad SAW established zones which are inviolable, zones that are called haram, around Makkah and Medina, within which native plants may not be felled or cut, and wild animals may not be hunted or disturbed. And Prophet Muhammad SAW also established protected areas called hima for the conservation and sustainable use of rangelands, plant cover, and wildlife. Sorry. So these two actions by the Prophet Muhammad SAW are actually, to me, the scope is at the national or the state levels. This is something that we can try to emulate by introducing areas which protect the natural world, wildlife, plants, and we have forest reserves, we have national parks, and this is something that we can establish in our country and also in respective states. Aside from these, at an individual level, we notice, and this is mentioned in many prophetic traditions. The Prophet Muhammad SAW lived a frugal life, free of excess, free of waste, and this is something that we should always emulate. The Prophet will only purchase what he needs, and when there are things that are in excess, he would give them away, donate these things. So again, this is in line what we have mentioned. This is in line with what we have mentioned regarding green practices.
Right.
And also, I think it's important to note that the Prophet Muhammad SAW ate simple, healthy food, which only occasionally include meat. So I think we are fortunate because we live in Malaysia. We are fortunate that we have an abundance of food. And because of this, sometimes we tend to go overboard when eating. So I think if we emulate the practices of Prophet Muhammad SAW, we buy what we need and we eat what is only necessary. And this can help to reduce waste, but at the same time, what is equally important, that this can also help in looking after our own health. We know
Yes.
that Malaysia has this reputation of being
Obese.
one of the most obese countries in the world.
Right.
So I think this has to do a lot with our diet and lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to live a healthy living, we have to look after our diet as well. And we can take Prophet Muhammad SAW as a good example when it comes to healthy eating.
Right.
And when it comes to the natural world, the Prophet Muhammad SAW take
Salam.
delight in the created world, the world that is created by Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and the actions of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, as mentioned by the Quran, are actions that are mercy to all living things. So if we can emulate these examples shown by the Prophet Muhammad SAW, then I think we can be at least sure that our own individual actions are actions that can help achieve sustainability and actions that can do justice to the natural world that is also created by Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala.
Inshallah. Fantastic. There's a lot of great reminders Dr. Shaikh shared with us this week. So would you like to give conclusion for our discussion on sustainability, doing justice to nature?
Right. I think as a conclusion, very briefly, Hajah Masrina, what I can say is that when we talk about sustainability, it should not just be slogans or rhetorics. It has to be something that needs to be translated into meaningful action so that it can really leave us with the impacts that we want. What we want is to ensure that the natural world that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has created is managed well without any forms of destruction or fasad done by mankind. And to do this, we have to go back to the Quran, to the Hadith. There are many examples given, and we can look at contemporary suggestions given by scholars on what we can do. And what is important is that we translate all these rhetorics or words into actions that we inculcate within ourselves. And let's try to, to encourage our family members, our society members, our friends, to also look after the environment in order to try to do justice to the world that Allah has created, which is also our responsibility as Khalifa on this one. Wallahu alam.
Right, inshallah. As they always say, kita jaga kita. It's not just us, between us humans. It's also about nature too, right, Dr. Shaikh?
True. I agree.
Okay, thank you very much for our sharing this week. Inshallah, I see you again next week, same time and
Inshallah.
same day, inshallah. Assalamualaikum. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.